I know that there has been a lot of movement around theologians writing about Acadia today and things. I wish I saw more though. I mean, we can sociologically, can't we all agree that the thing we all seem to have in common, conservative, liberal, everyone else is that we're experiencing Acadia. So
Hey, is it pronounced Acadia? I have heard it pronounced like 4 different ways.
I
Uh, I used to call it Acadia, then somebody corrected me and said, "Oh, no, it's Acedia." And then somebody says, "No, Acedia." It's like, "What the hell? What's going on here?"
I'll
So,
y'all keep talking. I'll figure it out.
yeah, you look it up so we can make a final and definitive judgment about Acadia versus Acedia.
What I'm gonna find is that there are 4 different ways to
I hope not. I hope not.
Oh, it's because okay. Yeah, you guys keep going and I'll put the story together.
Okay.
All right.
Well, what about going to the farm and its relationship to boredom, exhaustion, banality? Like, what has it and what has it not done for you?
Welcome to the Benedictine Thought and Action podcast. We are beginners in the Benedictine way, so we have to listen to the voice of wisdom, otherwise we're sunk. Join John and Jason as they learn to become more aware of God through living hospitably in community. Today's episode is an interview with Larry Chapp. Larry Chapp, PhD, is a retired professor of theology who taught at DeSales University for 20 years. He received his doctorate from Fordham University in 1994 with a specialization in the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar. He is now the owner and manager of the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker Farm near Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I'll let you listen, but I will be simultaneously conversating with the other AI voices that I have recently met in the ether. But don't worry, because of my status, I can be fully present in many conversations.
My name's Larry Chapp. I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, not too far from you guys, and grew up the son of a fireman and very blue collar, but still a very egghead nerdy little kid, thick glasses, skinny, prison gray from sitting in my basement reading books. And I sort of, read my way. When I was little, I was very interested in science and all that. I became a kind of fire-breathing atheist of the adolescent variety, annoying and obnoxious. But I gradually read my way back into the Catholic faith, cradle Catholic, but I had abandoned it and decided, well, now that I'm going to be, a Catholic, serious, I need to become a priest because I was a sort of all or nothing kind of kid. Went off to seminary and eventually ended up at Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. I decided just a few months away from ordination to the priesthood not to become a priest and decided to pursue. I left the seminary, pursued an academic career, got a PhD at Fordham University in 1994, specializing in the theology of Hans Urs von Balthasar, the late Swiss theologian, and immediately got a job at a little tiny college in Eastern PA, DeSales University. Used to be called Allentown College, now DeSales University. Taught there for 20 years, met my current wife there. And met my wife, not my current one, my wife there. I've had so many. Met my wife there and spent 20 years doing that. And then decided with my wife to retire from teaching and to start the Dorothy Day Catholic Worker Farm, which we have been doing now for 12 years. It's a long story as to how I discerned out of teaching. I was a pretty good teacher, but I just discerned out of it. And I'm very happy with what we're doing now. But then about 5 years ago, I started the GaudiumEtSpes22.com blog, which initially was just writing and then also writing and podcasting, and went viral. It took off. It hit a nerve. I don't know why. Ended up on Bishop Barron's interview show, and then it really took off. Was just recently on Matt Fred's Pints with Aquinas, and that has really increased viewership. So here I am now with you dudes.
Wow. Wow. And we met you because in 2024, you came to Sioux Falls and gave the 5th Aquinas Lecture on holiness in an age of unbelief. Yeah,
Yes, and I hope it went over well. I have no idea how these things go.
it definitely did. Yeah, we both have.
Tell you what, I had a blast there. And I wanna toot your horn. Great little college, but also in Sioux Falls, their beautiful, beautiful, church right there. Gorgeous church.
Yeah, yeah, the cathedral's amazing.
Yeah.
So I know you said you don't. Maybe this is a bad way to start this kind of thing, but you literally just said we don't have to get into it. How we discerned to leave teaching and start the.
But, if you want me to, I will.
Gosh, I mean, so I we have these 4 core values at our school: awareness of God, community, hospitality, and lifelong learning. And when we heard you at the Aquinas lecture, we're both standing in the back just thinking like, gosh, this is just an ideal person to come talk to us about all 4 of those 4 core values. But I think that your choice to follow Peter and Dorothy in this way is a really interesting one. And especially when you use language like I discerned out of teaching. And we're both teachers, and it's just that's too tasty to let you say we don't have to get into it.
Well, I'd be happy to get into it. I just didn't know how short you wanted my intro biography, my autobiography to be. I could go on at length. I should say that in some sense, it was not a parting of the ways from teaching because I was sick and tired of teaching. To hell with this place, I'm out of here. Shake the dust of DeSales off my feet. I love teaching, and I was a very good teacher, if I can toot my own horn. And my colleague and I, Dr. Rodney Hauser, he was my cohort in crime there. We developed a real synergy, and we developed a kind of following. It wasn't unusual at all for us to have like 30 or 40 theology majors in a given year at a school of about 1,500 undergraduates. And that's just kind of unheard of. And once again, I'm not saying that to brag, but to point out that we did hit a nerve, and Rodney and I had a certain synergy. So I'm just trying to say that I was happy there, and I was successful there, and I had met my wife there. She too is a PhD in theology. She now is a dean at St. Charles Seminary in Philadelphia, but at the time she was teaching at DeSales. And we had a student there by the name of John Gribowich, who ended up, long story, but he moved in with us for a while because he had issues with dorm. And long story short, he ended up becoming a kind of adoptive son to us. And then he eventually becomes a priest of the Diocese of Brooklyn. And the reason why this is all important is that he was very drawn to Dorothy Day, Peter Maurin, and the Catholic worker movement. Very orthodox, solid, sort of priest, but he really wanted to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And he got involved in the Catholic Worker House in New York City. And Carrie and I, that's my wife's name, Carrie, had been teaching social justice-ish, courses here and there at DeSales. And we too had started teaching a lot about Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin and the Catholic worker movement, among other social justice issues. But it began to strike all 3 of us, John Gribowich, my wife, and I, almost at the same time, that we were talking the talk, but we really weren't walking the walk. And I hit, maybe it was some sense like a delayed midlife crisis too. I hit like age 54, and I realized I was at that watershed moment in life where I was either going to make a change at that point in my life, or I was probably going to be at DeSales teaching there until the day that I died. You hit like age 60 or 60. I'm 66 now. And, you get in your mid 60s. And at that point, you're saying, I'm not going to quit my job and start a stupid farm. All right. So I realized that I was on like this moment where, okay, I got to make a decision. And all 3 of us at the same time, John's father had just passed away, and we all just said at the same time, let's start a Catholic worker farm. All 3 of us had come to the same conclusion, independently sort of each other. And then we finally had this great eureka moment where we came together and realized the Holy Spirit really was speaking to each of us individually, but now collectively, that this is something we needed to do. Initially, I was going to keep teaching at DeSales and do the farm, but I found that it was too much to do, and I had to choose. And so I chose to retire early and do the farm. So there wasn't any great acrimony against teaching. And in a lot of ways, I felt a little guilty about leaving the classroom. A lot of my former students were like, "Oh, don't go, don't go, don't go." But the fact is, I still consider myself to be a teacher. In fact, starting the blog and doing my podcast as well as what I do here on the farm, I consider to be simply continuing my vocation as a Catholic teacher, evangelist, whatever you want to call it, just in a different modality.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing.
It's really interesting. One thing that you said intrigued me. And before we get into the book, I guess this could be sort of a segue to the book, but you sort of made a preface when you were talking about the young man who was getting interested in Dorothy Day and said, like, he was very orthodox. He was very orthodox,
Yeah.
interested in all of this. And it is something that we sort of have to preface.
That's a,
A lot of people have a lot of ideas about Catholic worker either being really, my experiences with them has been mostly very conservative Anglicans starting houses. And my experience here has been that if I bring up Catholic worker, most people assume that it's like a leftist thing. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on why that prefacing needs to happen, or if that has you have any insight on Catholic worker that.
I think there's a lot of reasons. First off, it's very, very important to point out that Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin were both completely Orthodox Catholics. They accepted all church teaching. They really did. They accepted all church teaching, even the sexual stuff, all right, that so many Catholics reject. And they were very, very clear about that. But they were radical Catholics in the sense that they believed and believed strongly in the universal call to holiness for the laity and living out the Sermon on the Mount in very radical ways. And that often put them at odds with their fellow Catholics at that time, as well as, certain elements of the hierarchy in the Catholic Church in the United States who viewed their agitations. Remember, this was the era of the Cold War, who viewed their agitations, especially in the 60s, as communist, Marxist, pro-Soviet, especially when Dorothy Day did, I think she made a mistake here. She was initially very sympathetic to Castro's revolution in Cuba. Even though she was a pacifist and opposed to armed revolution and that sort of stuff, she nevertheless had a soft spot in her heart for Castro's revolution in Cuba, and she said so. And that sort of stuck with her for a long time. So the stigma, and before she converted to Catholicism, she did flirt with Marxism and Marxist social cause and so forth. So there is this shadow that dogged her entire life, that she was kind of maybe a Marxist or something along those lines. And so I think a lot of more conservative Catholics, they know that about her, that she did have a certain sympathy for for Marxism, but her sympathy for Marxism was that Dorothy Day really did not believe very much at all in capitalism and the capitalist system. And so what she admired about Marxism wasn't obviously the brutality of Soviet-style gulags and concentration camps. And she later repudiated Castro. No, what she admired about Marxism was its critique of capitalism. So kind of under the principle of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, there was a certain sympathy, I guess, she had for Marxist ideology, but she was thoroughly Catholic, very much so. A daily mass goer, very devout, and so on. Then also, I think the perception that she is a leftist or the Catholic worker was then perpetuated by the fact that there are many Catholic worker houses that are very, very not Catholic at all, barely Catholic, more leftist political agitators than they are Catholic at all.
Oh, I see.
There is a kind of, in that regard, a generational divide. The older generation of Catholic workers are like liberal, hippie, burned out refugees from the 60s. But there is a younger generation of Catholic workers rising up, like a guy Colin Miller, a former Anglican, up in the Minneapolis area, who's opened a great little house of hospitality, and a few others that I know. So there are good, solid Catholic worker houses out there, but then there are still quite a few that are a little nutsy.
So, um, could you give us a quick distinction between like a house and a farm in the
Yeah, it's easy. The houses of hospitality are in the urban centers, and they are geared towards being an emergency shelter for homeless people to have a place to stay, but also a soup kitchen to give people something to eat during the day. And I would say probably the majority of Catholic worker houses are these houses of hospitality. But Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin, when they were still alive, started also the Catholic worker farms, and they envisioned the farms as being places where people could come out into the country and experience the beauty and the grandeur of nature and the rhythms of, nature and that sort of stuff as a sort of refuge from the cities. Peter Maurin also viewed the farms, he called them the agronomic university, and he advocated for culture and cultivation. He was an old-fashioned sort of agrarian, localist, distributist, romantic, long before we even called them those things, and so that was part of the vision of the farms too, was a kind of back to the land agrarianism.
Okay, so this is interesting because you are a fireman's son, not a farmer.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Are
I
you
don't know, I grew up in Nebraska, but I didn't know anything about farming.
you go into this as a rookie?
Yeah.
Oh my word.
My wife refers to me as the YouTube farmer because everything I know about farming, I learned from the University of YouTube. I always use this example. Our first year here, we had a rooster, and he turned out to be rather mean, so I decided to kill it and butcher it and have it for dinner. But I had no idea how to kill a chicken. I figured you cut its head off or something, but, so I went on YouTube and said, "Yep, okay, yeah, you cut its head off, and then you scald it and pluck the feathers and blah, blah, blah." And that was my first lesson in the fact that, oh, you can learn basically anything on YouTube.
Don't I?
So, yeah.
That's
I'm
amazing.
pretty sure everything I know about home maintenance is coming from.
Oh, yeah. Well, I learned how to milk, we have dairy goats, and I learned how to milk. I'd never milked, a goat or a cow in my life.
Yeah.
But I went on YouTube, and there was a dude there. You can go on YouTube, and there are dudes and dudettes that will show you how to milk a goat.
Noted.
Yeah. I'm kinda into it.
Yeah.
All right. That's a
I highly recommend it. There's something very, very meditative and therapeutic about, milking cows or goats.
My friend has cows, and when he milks cows and he gets, robocalls and, like, telemarketers, he just stays on the line with them for the whole time, just stringing them along as he milks. It's meditative, but that's it. That's his way. Yeah.
Now, when I'm out milking the goats, I leave my phone up in the kitchen. I don't bring it down with me.
Um, okay, so we sent you some questions. Um, it seems like since we're doing this, we've kind of foregrounded your move to well, you even use the language of talking the talk and walking the walk.
Yeah.
Our podcast is interested in examining the relationship between thought and action.
Yeah.
And you say that in the book, in your excellent new book, Confession of a Catholic Worker, um, that you were young and you naively assumed that right action would follow seamlessly from right belief. So why was that belief naive? Oh, now
Well,
that
because
what is
yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's towards the beginning of the book, and it has to do with my, uh, youthful, years in the seminary, and, this was the 1970s. This was the era of the post-conciliar turmoil. This was the era of the liberal co-opting of the church and the exile of more conservative Catholics into the ecclesial hinterland. It was brutal. I mean, it was think of every caricature you can think of Father Skippy Toes and the Rainbow Coalition of prancing octogenarians and it, in the sanctuary doing their liturgical dancing. And it's not an exact clown masses, you name it. Okay, and it was what George Weigel calls the silly season. The church lost its collective mind in the United States for about 20 years. John Paul II came along and righted the ship, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why the current rise in young traditionalists who think John Paul II was this crypto-modernist because he kissed a Koran and prayed with others at Assisi, they need to have their heads examined because they're insane. It was John Paul II that finally stopped the hemorrhaging of this insane church. But anyway, when I was a young seminarian, I therefore got into the mentality that, okay, there are orthodox seminarians and then there are the heretic seminarians. And I just automatically assumed that the orthodox priests and seminarians were the knights in shining armor. They were the good guys, and all the heretical or lefty or liberal seminarians and priests were the bad guys. And that anything bad happening in the church was because of dadgum liberals had taken over everything. And that we just had all these conservatives in power and then everything would be hunky-dory. Well, that turns out to have been a false narrative. Because the sexual abuse crisis, by the way, before it hit the fan in 2002, those of us who were in the seminary in the late 70s and into the 80s knew that a day of reckoning was coming, because we could look around to our fellow seminarians and see the parade of perverts that we were surrounded by, and realizing that the chickens were going to come home to roost. Me and my friends would sit around a room going, I can't believe Bishop XYZ ordained that guy. Does he not know that that guy is sexually active, homosexual, predatory, and so on? And so we knew. But we began to realize very quickly that there was no neat line of demarcation in the sexual abuse domain between conservative and liberals, that conservative seminarians were just as prone to that kind of sexual sin as the liberal ones were. In fact, I'll go this far and say this. The young seminarians that were very conservative, and before they were even ordained a deacon, had their closets filled with vestments that their Aunt Figida bought for them in Rome, all right? And they had already purchased 75 chalices to use for various, blah, blah. And their room was a virtual museum, the high church camp, all right? And you began to realize these guys were play acting. These guys were playing dress up, all right? And there was a sexual element to it. So yeah, I came to see very quickly that there is no moral purity just because one is theologically orthodox. And that some of the most holy seminarians and priests I ended up knowing were actually guys that I didn't agree with theologically just about on any level at all. So anyway, that's the genesis of that statement in the book.
Okay. So then I have a kind of a tightly related question. You said in the book that we need a reform of theology, and that this reform is the only remedy. But then, given what you just said about action and belief, why do you think the only remedy to our situation has to do with reforming theology?
Well, because I don't want to overstate my case, all right? It's possible to find holy priests among liberals and sinful priests amongst conservatives. Nevertheless, my point is that theology is a necessary but not a sufficient basis for real action, proper action in the church. Necessary but not sufficient basis. You need more than just theology. But the baseline, though, is this. You do need also good theology, because no matter how many good people you can find in terms of sanctity in the liberal wing of the church, the fact of the matter is that bad theology does eventually give rise to bad praxis. And therefore, it is important to make sure that theology is reformed properly. I might sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. All right. In one sense, it's true. We can't make a nice, neat, linear line from good theology to good praxis. On the other hand, as a general rule, you're going to need good theology in order for there to be a broad spectrum good praxis within the church.
I think I understand what you're saying.
I read the book a little too long ago now, Larry. Could you all remind me what's the nature of this reform?
Oh, it's the ressourcement theology. It's the communio theology. And my point is in the book is that if you look at the various theological schools of thought that have influenced the church over the past century or two, you've got the strong neo-scholastic interpretation of Thomas Aquinas, which reigned supreme from the late 19th century through the middle part of the 20th century. And it's good. I mean, it's good theology, it's good philosophy and all that, but it's not completely adequate to addressing the questions of modernity, in my point of view. Liberal theology comes along, and we don't need to dwell on the problems with liberal theology, which is essentially just a gigantic accommodationist exercise to tailoring the gospel to the modern world, to reducing the gospel to the modern world. Not good, not good. But then you've got the ressourcement, the back to the source theologians that arose in the 20th century, early to mid 20th century. Guys like Joseph Ratzinger, Jean Danielou, Henry de Lubac, Louis Bouillet, Romano Guardini, Hans Urs von Balthasar. And their point was, yes, Thomas is great, scholasticism is useful, but theology needs to expand its horizons in order to deal with the modern world by returning to not just Aquinas, but to the church fathers and to the scriptures. They wanted to reread Aquinas through the lens of the scriptures and the church fathers in order to expand the theological vision, in order to address modern concerns. And I think I am personally a ressourcement or communio theologian, as we're called, and I really think that it's just about the only viable theological option in the church right now.
So this would be related to our first question in those that I sent to you. You wrote in the book that the sender is not holding. The strong gods of tribal loyalties have returned. So
Yeah.
your description of the dead end of traditionalism and progressivism, I think, really resonates with the spirit of this podcast. Could you say more about what you mean when you say the center's not holding? I mean, that's a famous phrase, etc. But how does that
Yeah.
phrase work for you?
Well, I think that let me back up a second. I think that you find a lot of formerly sort of John Paul II type young Catholics who were great devotees of John Paul and Benedict, who, to use another sort of popular term, who had been red-pilled into radical traditionalism because of their experience of Catholicism under Pope Francis, which they perceived to be a Catholicism of loosey-goosey liberalism. And I don't think they're entirely wrong about that, although Francis is a very confusing and complex figure, not easily pigeonholed as either a liberal or a conservative. He seems to excel in vexing people and antagonizing them more than anything. But at the very least, what's the German phrase? Gute Leute muss man haben. Good people. You have to have good people. Gute Leute muss man haben. And Pope Francis has surrounded himself with bad people. Okay. And in this sense, with progressives, like the Synod on Solidarity is run by Cardinal Hollerich of Luxembourg, who's on record of dissenting from just about every church sexual teaching there is, and so on and so forth. Why was Father James Martin, made a voting member of the Synod on Synodality instead of the priest president of Courage? These are little tells, as we say in poker, little tells. And people are not stupid. Actions speak louder than words. And the Pope Francis says everything orthodox and properly, but his actions are that he has undermined orthodoxy via the path of episcopal appointments. And therefore, a lot of young Catholics have been red-pilled into radical traditionalism because they perceive that the center is not holding. So long as John Paul or Benedict were in Rome, the church could be falling apart and in flames all around us, but at least we had that consolation. The center holds. Rome holds. The rock of Peter is solid. We're going to be okay. We'll weather this storm. But what do you do? What do you do then when the Pope himself seems to equivocate? Let's just put it that way, to equivocate. And that, I think, is what I mean when there's a perception now that the center is not holding.
The center means Rome here.
The center here means Rome.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay.
I guess didn't have to say all that. I could have just said Rome. The center means Rome.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. a little bit of a pivot from those kinds of things.
I like pivots.
Yeah, sure. Sure. You pay a lot of attention to boredom, exhaustion, banality, and other signs that Christians have given up on the radical nature of the gospel.
Yeah.
And at one point, you write that you sense a jaded exhaustion in yourself. So the book, by your own admission in the book, is polemical, but it seems like maybe it's a kind of therapy for you. So I don't know if this is too personal, but we wondered if you could help us understand your jaded exhaustion. How do you see it in your own life, and why is it so troubling?
It's deeply troubling. And I don't think that I'm unique. I don't mind sharing this with people at all because in my experience of sharing this with people, what I've discovered is that very, very, very many people have a common experience. What I often say to people, because what I write, it's polemical or whatever you want to call it. I like to think, it's edgy. It uses sometimes quite often satire and sarcasm to make its point. It's blunt, it's pointed, hopefully a bit prophetic. So what it sometimes to some people it comes across as too scorched earth and perhaps a little too judgmental. Who are you to be sort of standing up and giving this Jeremiad against everything and everyone? And that's why I do pause and I say, look, here's the deal. I'm not preaching at people. I'm talking to myself. I am a leper talking to other lepers. I'm infected with the same bacillus that everybody else is as well. And so when I look out and I diagnose, here's the malaise that afflicts modernity, and it is a spiritual malaise, a deep spiritual boredom, a deep spiritual ennui and sort of exhaustion at the entire modern project. I'm able to diagnose that, and I think I'm accurate for the most part in that diagnosis because I see it in myself, and I hate it in myself. And my entire spiritual life as an adult Catholic has been one long twilight struggle against the strong gods of Blut und Erde, of blood and soil, the strong gods of the Dionysian impulses that well up from below, that require a strong ascetical side, in a sense, to channel properly, and so on. And by Dionysian impulse, I'm not talking sex. I'm just talking about anger, gluttony, you know, annoyance, impatience, all of these sorts of elemental things that I have a hard time, getting a handle on because they require an ascesis. An ascesis requires a certain fortitude and discipline, but that's precisely what the modern world robs us of, because the ancient spiritual writers called it acedia, the inability to find joy in spiritual things. That's what the modern world robs us of. And it robs us of the inability to find joy in spiritual things because it robs us of the ability to find joy in anything,
Uh.
in anything. Because ultimately, the message of modernity is you're born, some doo-doo happens to you, then you die, and the worms get you. So in between birth and the worms, try to carve out some little small piece of happiness for yourself. It's rarely that explicit, but that's the implicit message of our culture.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. I know that there has been a lot of movement around theologians writing about Acadia today and things. I wish I saw more though. I mean, we can sociologically, can't we all agree that the thing we all seem to have in common, conservative, liberal, everyone else is that we're experiencing Acadia. So
Hey, is it pronounced Acadia? I have heard it pronounced like 4 different ways.
I
Uh, I used to call it Acadia, then somebody corrected me and so, "No, it's Acedia." And then somebody says, "No, Acedia." It's like, "What the hell? What's going on here?"
I'll
So,
y'all keep talking. I'll figure it out.
yeah, you look it up so we can make a final and definitive judgment about Acadia versus Acedia.
I'm gonna find is that there are 4 different ways to breath.
I hope not. I hope not.
Oh, it's 'cause, okay. Yeah, you guys keep going and I'll put the story together.
Okay.
All right.
Well, what about going to the farm, and its relationship to boredom, exhaustion, banality. Like, what has it and what has it not done for you in terms of fighting this jaded exhaustion?
Well, first off, it's because farming was something utterly foreign to me. It required me to go out of myself. You know, one of the aspects of boredom is that, you know, you're doing the same old, same old, same old, you know, and like I said, I didn't grow enraged at teaching or upset with teaching or whatever, but I did reach, I felt channelized, I felt unchallenged. That's what I mean by I talked the talk, but I didn't walk the walk. And what I meant was I didn't feel challenged. I knew that one of the remedies to that sort of banality and boredom was to embrace a kind of challenge where you have to go out of yourself. And I knew that moving to the farm would do that. But also, I knew that it was true that I needed a deeper spiritual life in order to combat this kind of boredom within me. And I knew that in order to deepen my spiritual life, I needed greater access to silence, contemplation, a more natural rhythm in life on the land, and I have found that here. You know, other people can find that in the city,
Sure.
surrounded by noise. I could not. I could not.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Okay,
got something?
time out.
Okay, you got it.
I think I say it Acadia because I learned it from Hooter at Duke, and he probably said it Acadia. Oh yeah, leisure here with it.
That's a good Reinhardt impersonation, by the way.
Yeah, well, he taught me a lot, so I heard a lot.
What a great guy Reinhard Hooter is.
Couldn't just a beautiful soul. So I think that I must have learned the Latin pronunciation from him, and it's got a long A in the middle, so that would be Acadia. But I think where they're getting Acadia from is that its Greek root probably would be said Acadia with the primary emphasis on the D, the dia.
Okay, so Acadia.
As far as I can tell, correct us out there, listeners who are more linguistically capable than me, but I'd say Greek, Acadia, and Latin, Acadia.
I just say I feel tired all the time.
I just feel spiritually tired.
Just kind of.
Hope. So here I've been saying it wrong you know, actually I used to say it right, and then someone corrected me, and I've been saying it wrong ever since then.
You'd have to track
Yeah, Acadea. Okay, very good. Let's go from there. Let's just say I'm pretty damn bored today, fellers.
Yeah. I've had the same challenge with whatever council happened in 451.
Yeah.
I no longer know how to say it because
Don't we all just say it like our church history professor taught us?
where I asked my Latin teacher at
Chalcedon.
Yeah, Chalcedon, that's my favorite one.
and I asked
That can't be right.
my Latin professor was a classics guy, and he's like, when I asked him, he's like, "You don't want to know," and I was like, "What?" And he's like, "It's probably not any of the ones you're saying," and I was like, "What is it?" He's like, There's a chance it's Chalcedon," and I was like, "All right, whatever."
Oh, yeah.
Never mind.
Well, you definitely don't want to say it like Greek. That's Chalcedon.
Yeah.
Chalcedon.
He's probably being gentle with me. Chalcedon.
Very good.
Linguistic Corner. Thanks for everybody for visiting Linguistic Corner. We're going to go now.
Put a little like bright, like the more you know.
Well, you mentioned Duke, you know, if Stanley Hauerwas it here, it don't matter what you call it. Either way, it's just a lot of Catholic hoo-ha.
That's right. So he turned out to be my ethics teacher somewhat unexpectedly, and he would definitely say, "It doesn't matter what you call it."
That's right. No, you gotta love Stanley too. Stanley's great.
Absolutely.
Well, what is Stanley now? Like 9 million years old? Poor
Point in life where I have seen him, that has been my impression. Yes.
Yeah, I should talk. I'm quite old too.
Maintained every day. We'll cut this out, but he maintained every day a jean, like full chambray outfit with a button down, buttoned almost open to his belly button, and like chains hanging out. And then he would come into class, and it'd be ethics class, and he'd say, "Well, we're talking about Malcolm X again." Like that's and the syllabus for me
Yeah, you gotta love Stanley.
is so good, so good.
Okay. Got a couple more. You doing okay? You run out of steam? You feeling
No, no, I'm good.
archaic? Uh,
Yeah.
uh, we really appreciated your precision on enchantment. You follow Eugene McCarher and saying this is not a disenchanted age, it's a misenchanted age.
Yeah.
Um, and that seems, I think, a pretty fruitful way to talk about idolatry. Maybe there is no such thing as being disenchanted. We're
Well,
misenchanted.
yeah, I think there's probably various ways of correlating the disenchantment thesis with McCarthy's thesis of misenchantment. I think McCarthy would essentially agree with the idea that insofar as our culture was suffused with the values of the Christian faith, that there were sacral, transcendent elements to it that were lost post-Enlightenment, post-scientific revolution, wherever you want to identify it, 17th century, 19th century, whatever. But it eventually does come to be lost. So there was a disenchantment with the fundamental sacral structures of Western society that left us kind of adrift. But where McCarr's point is that since human beings are incorrigibly worshipful animals with a religious sense, that something does rush into that vacuum, that we cannot live completely disenchanted lives. It's impossible for us. We have to find something to enchant us. By the way, for example, I would think all of this craze right now about UAPs and UFOs and drones and mysteries and aliens, I actually think this is simply a secular search for the re-enchantment of something. That this is a sign that our culture is looking for some kind of enchantment. I think McCarra would agree. But in McCarra's point of view, what replaces the enchantments of Christianity, or it's misenchantments in his view, because it's a poor enchantment, or is money, mammon. But mammon means something more than just money. It means the entire culture of money production, consumerism, capitalism, all those kinds of things that we were talking about kind of before with regard to Dorothy Day. McCarrick thinks that this has become our God. This has become our deity. And if you look at how, if you adopt the kind of functionalist sociological understanding of the role that religion plays in society, then it's pretty clear that money and the bourgeois cult of well-being, as Berdyaev would call it, that is our enchantment now, that is our God. And it's a poor God. And so it is, in a sense, idolatrous, because it's not the proper God, and thus is going to lead to all kinds of distortions.
You just brought up Dorothy again, and John and I were wondering, as you were talking earlier about joining the movement, and maybe this would be an interesting way to circle back to that. What role do you think Dorothy and Peter play in the movement now and in the future when we're further along this? I mean, they would have been familiar with whatever misenchantment by Mammon, in their own
Yeah.
context. They haven't been gone that long, but as younger people start to occupy the
Yeah.
place that they've left behind and take over the houses and the farms, uh, and we're all suffering from, how do we say, Acadia?
Acadia. Let's call it Acadia. We're going to agree it's Acadia.
We're all suffering from that, and we're all misenchanted by Mammon. Um,
Yeah.
what's their status now? What role do they play now?
Well, I think it varies from Catholic worker house to Catholic worker house. I think there is currently an ongoing resurgence of theological interest in Dorothy Day in particular. There's not a whole lot of interest in Peter Maurin, because Peter died in the late 40s of Alzheimer's, and he didn't leave a whole lot of writings behind. He had some columns in the Catholic Worker paper. He wrote these famous things called easy essays, which were almost these short little poetic sort of writings filled with kind of simple aphorisms that you could memorize and remember. And so Peter's legacy is going to be really channeled through Dorothy. his great importance was the tremendous and powerful influence he had over Dorothy Day. Peter Maurin was an autodidact, because he was in many ways self-taught theology. He went through Christian education in France as a Christian. He was studied with the Christian Brothers. But his education was lively. His erudition was massive. He had read everything. And so that was his importance is his influence on Dorothy. So we really need to take a look at what is the ongoing theological significance of Dorothy Day. And when we unpack her writings, what we see is that, forget all the Marxist stuff. Yeah, she had a certain sympathy for that, for its capitalist critique. What really influenced her were the writings of what we'd call today the personalists, people like Emmanuel Mounier and Berdayev, Nikolai Berdayev, the Russian sociologists, but then also important Catholic theologians and philosophers, people like Joseph Pieper and Jacques Maritain and Romano Guardini. These are people that she was very, very influenced by. So I think that in order to retrieve her properly, she needs to be retrieved as, in a sense, the radical embodiment in terms of the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, the radical embodiment of the certain elements of the ressourcement theological movement, which is why, by the way, some of her greatest theological supporters and fans and devotees today are people like down at the editorial offices of Communio in Washington, D.C. It's Communio, which was started by Balthasar, Ratzinger, de Lubac, and so forth, and now is run out of Washington, D.C., the English version. And I mean, they have a great love for Dorothy Day and for Catherine Doherty with Madonna House up in Canada and so on. And so I think the legacy of Dorothy Day, and I think it's rising, is to view her, as I said, as the radical embodiment of the ressourcement theological revolution. And this is the proper way. A great book, by the way, in this regard, it's a book written by two Catholic workers, one now deceased, Mark Zwick, but Mark and Louise Zwick, Zwick, and the book is just called The Catholic Worker Movement. But the Zwicks ran a Catholic worker house in Houston, and it's still there. And it's very, very orthodox, very, very solid Catholic stuff. But the Zwicks are ressourcement people, or communio people, and they have properly situated Dorothy Day within that theological landscape. Now, this is controversial because I've written along these lines as well, and I get nasty emails from more liberal Catholic workers who say, "How dare you disrespect the memory of Dorothy Day by placing her in the company of such fascist reactionaries?" You you ask them, "What do you mean by fascist reactionary?" "Well, they're anti-LGBTQ." Okay. So it all comes down to the gays. All right. So, if you're not sufficiently pro-rainbow coalition, you get dismissed by certain elements. But that's where I would put Dorothy Day and I think there is a resurgence of that. I do.
Okay. So, well, I guess this is maybe actually related to something you just said. You in the book are like super critical of political liberalism, but then you also don't seem like a person who could ever be an integralist.
No.
So I wonder how you understand those two positions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. You know what I
Yeah, I'm definitely one by, so the viewers understand. I hope they know, political liberalism means, that 18th century political philosophy that flows out of John Locke and people like that. And I'm very critical of that, as was the late, great David L. Schindler, who was the editor of the American Communio edition, among others. And so there has emerged of late what is known as post-liberal Catholic thinkers, like Patrick Deneen, Chad Pecknold, David C. Schindler, Michael Hanby, the New Polity guys, at Steubenville, and so on. And apparently they've had a great deal of influence on our vice president, J.D. Vance. But the post-liberal thinkers are sort of all over the map. Some of them are somewhat integralist, others are not. But integralism, and let's face it, that's a strange term. In some ways, all governments are integralist. All governments have to embody and embrace a set of moral values of some kind, metaphysical commitments. There is the great lie of liberalism, and that's why I oppose it, is precisely that it represents this amoral, non-metaphysical, neutral playing field that's simply a place where we can all get along and play happy together. And so that's absolute retrograde nonsense. Liberalism comes with an entire set of metaphysical and moral and spiritual even commitments. Therefore, there's no avoiding integralism of some kind. All states are inherently confessional on some level, and to be clear. So we're talking about here is the relative degree of the integralism, how much freedom you're going to allow towards those who don't share in the consensus, and then the nature of the metaphysical and theological commitments that inform this state-run enterprise. I don't like the term integralist, though, because it has come historically to become associated with, strong-armed Catholic confessional states that outlaw all religions except Catholicism and so on. And I don't want to be labeled as that or associated with that. Dorothy Day described herself as an anarchist. And by that, she didn't mean that she didn't believe in any kind of government. What she meant was that she opposed strongly the centralizing power of the Leviathan of the modern nation state. And I would describe myself as that as well. So insofar as both political liberalism and even post-liberal integralisms still all believe in some kind of sovereign national state, and so I would disagree with all those. I think the closest thing that would be to describe Dorothy and myself would be something along the lines of an anarchist paleoconservative, wherein governments must arise naturally out of the natural commitments of language and culture and affinity with people that are close by, localism, and strong elements of subsidiarity thrown in there as well. A great book by Andrew Willard Jones. It's called, Before There Was Church and State. He's one of the New Polity guys, which is really an analysis of, 14th century, 13th, 14th century France, which shows that, the sort of feudal structure of those cultures and those societies wasn't all bad. I mean, obviously slavery is bad, feudalism is bad in terms of the indentured servitude, so on. But the nature of the government that was there was interesting. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I think you get my point.
Andrew Willard
Jones.
New Polity is Andrew Willard Jones. New Polity is associated with some guys at Steubenville.
Yes, it is. Guys like Andrew Willard Jones, Jacob Imam, Mark Barnes. Yeah. They have a magazine that they publish called New Polity. I highly recommend that people subscribe to it. Just go to newpolity.com or whatever it is. You'll find their thing. Very interesting folks. Post-liberal, not really integralist in the hard sense. It's very interesting stuff. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
I'm going to add one more thing.
All right. Yeah, go for it.
People often say, well, Mr. Smarty Pants, you hate the modern political edifice. What's your answer? I don't have one. The fact is that it's okay to point out the tremendous deficit, the spiritual deficit that modern government represent, and still also admit that you don't know what will come next. That you don't, I'm not a political theorist. I don't know concretely what's going to come next. I think that none of us know yet what is going to emerge out of the post-liberal situation.
Sure.
I just hope it's not violent.
Sure. That seems fair enough. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is like you said Dorothy appreciated the Marxist critique of capitalism.
Yes.
So you can levy the critique without having some like massive proposal to like slide in after you've dismantled something. I mean, this is also frankly just pretty normal academic behavior, right? Here are all the problems you've got over there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dorothy was a believer in like the Chestertonian or that of Hilaire Belloc, their distributism.
Yeah.
All right, and so the question then is, once one destroys corporate crony capitalism, or it slowly devolves away from itself, and you see the rise of small businesses everywhere and a more distributist form of free market, free enterprise, it's only then that you will begin to see, well, what kind of governing structures are going to emerge from that. So you kind of have to do it in order to develop it.
So I predict that anyone who might listen to this episode would not know what distributism is.
Oh, distributism really kind of arose in Europe amongst Catholic thinkers, often British Anglo thinkers, and it's a way of re-envisioning capitalism as, instead of being focused on wealth and wealth production and stock markets and profits and profit sharing and all that all of the engine of modern capitalist enterprise, to re-envision free market away from that kind of corporate monopolistic capitalism as a broad distribution of small businesses. In other words, so that, yeah, distributists believe strongly in free markets and free enterprise, and they believe strongly in people having the freedom of economic exchange as they see fit. But they do believe that things get out of whack when capitalism tends to concentrate wealth in the hands of a very few. And so most of us then become wage slaves, as we call it, and so on. And so the solution was then, well, let's empower small farmers and let's empower small businesses. So a modern day distributist would say things like, don't shop at Amazon.com, don't shop at Walmart, don't shop at Target, go to the mom and pop places and so on.
Yeah.
But trouble is, they don't exist anymore.
Right. Okay. Have you thought of more questions in addition to what we've got on the paper?
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to run a couple things past you, Larry. I'd like to.
Sure.
I've gotten the impression over the course of us talking that sort one of the theses here in this conversation and in your thought is that this way that you're describing, both in the sense of Catholic worker and in your own theology, is sort of a middle way between caricatures of liberalism and caricatures of conservatism. And I wonder if that, and I know that to be true because when you describe views like yours, you get people recoiling from both sides, which is, I'm sure, a great comfort to you. But
Yes.
I wonder if that's just not an American Catholic phenomena. I mean, the fact that American Catholics identify more deeply with their own political party than their actual, and that you and Dorothy and others are really just pointing them back to an orthodoxy that doesn't fit into American political buckets.
Yeah, I don't have enough experience of non-American cultures, say, especially the ones, in Europe that have existed over the past 100 years, to say that this is a strictly American phenomenon. But it is definitely an American phenomenon where, conservative Catholics all tend to be conservative Republicans, pro this, pro that, and likewise liberal Catholics tend to be liberal Democrats and so on. And then everything gets read through this political lens. Uh, and so, yeah, I am disliked intensely by very conservative Catholics who think I'm just wishy-washy. I'm disliked intensely by liberal Catholics who don't like my conservative views on sexual morality, and because I'm a Catholic, right? I adhere to Catholic teaching. They don't like that. All right, so yeah, I catch it from both ends, and also the neoconservative types don't like me very much because I oppose the military-industrial complex, and most neocon Catholics had never met a war they didn't like or bless. All right, and so they don't like me for my Catholic worker critique of the military establishment. And so, yeah, you start to feel a little homeless in the sense that it seems like all these other theological positions are motivated more by antecedent political commitments than they are by theology. But then, go back, there's a great book by Sarah Shorthall. She teaches at Notre Dame. Hang on. Right here. Great book, Soldiers of God. Soldiers of God in a Secular World. Catholic Theology in 20th Century French Politics. What's interesting about that book on the topic at hand here is that if you know that the great debates in the early 20th century on the theology of nature and grace between Gary Lagrange, the French Dominican on the one hand, and Henry de Lubac, the French Jesuit on the other, you would think that the debates were entirely about theology. After all, these were two theologians, and the debates were heated. And yet, what Sarah Shortall points out is, Lagrange was part of a French political movement called Action Française that was all about restoration of the monarchy, integralism, the repudiation of the French secular republic, and all of that, which is why Lagrange was actually sympathetic to Marshal Pétain and the Vichy government in France during the Nazi occupation. Not because he was pro-Nazi, but because he was hoping that this was the death of the Republic and a new integralist Catholic monarchy would arise after the war was over. And his theology of nature and grace kind of flowed out of his desire, and it's long and complicated. But on the other hand, Henry de Lubac was part of a French political movement called Catholic Action. And Catholic Action repudiated integralism and said, no, we've lost the institutions that drive our culture. We've lost French culture. We need to fight on the level of culture. We need to get down in the trenches of culture and reconvert from below the French people. This then drove a lot of Henry de Lubac's theological speculations about nature and grace. And Sarah Shortall makes this very clear. So I think that in one sense, it's very, very hard to, in a sense, disincarnate yourself from your own cultural, socio-political environment and to pretend as if your theological speculations are in any way colored by your antecedent political concerns, because I think they are. My theological constructions are very influenced by the fact, that I was raised in late 20th century secularized America and a church that had gone nuts. All right, that is clearly always in the back of my brain. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely.
Bill Portier said, "Oh yeah, Larry, he walks a very fine line."
Bill is a very, very dear friend of mine. Yes.
You got another one?
No, I think I want to know some books you'd recommend to our readers, or if there's anything that is a follow up to the things you've been talking to us about, other than your wonderful book, Confession of a Catholic Worker.
Well, gosh, there are so many books, but with regard to Dorothy Day, I've always found the book by the Swicks, The Catholic Worker Movement, to be good. Also, just read Dorothy Day's autobiography called The Long Loneliness, which I think is an excellent book. I also think uh, that any book written by guys like Henry de Lubac and Romano Guardini, which, in other words, go to the Ignatius Press catalog and find books by Ratzinger, de Lubac, Guardini, Louis Bouillet, Hans Urs von Balthasar. I think you could not do any better than that. Especially, I would highly recommend books by Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict.
Okay, so that's like your greatest hits, but like, what are you
Yeah.
reading right now?
Oh, well, what I'm reading right now, because I'm writing a book on modernism.
So it'll be a light romp.
Yeah. So I'm reading this book. It's a classic, Critics on Trial, An Introduction to the Catholic Modernist Crisis by Marvin O'Connell.
Yep.
So I'm kind of reading that right now, as well as, by a certain Bill Portier, Divided Friends,
I wondered.
which is about the fallout of the modernist controversy amongst Americans, because Bill's an American Catholic historian. So those are the two books I'm plowing through right now. But I'm also, God, when it comes to books, if I could pan around, it's just I've got books everywhere. I free range.
Yeah.
I keep about 10 books around me, and so if the thing is this, this is a piece of advice. In order not to be distracted by this little antichrist device called my iPhone, right? In order not to be distracted by that, I think, and I say this sincerely, especially during Lent, I think there's no substitute for reading.
Yeah.
And so I engage in this discipline where I have a certain set of books I'm reading for the project I'm engaged, modernism. But if I start to grow bored with that, I don't set it aside and say, oh, okay, let's go to Facebook and see who's on there. I pick up a different book on a different topic and say, okay, I'm going to start reading this a little bit. And if I start to get bored with that a little bit, I start to pick up another book. Now that can scatter your brains all over the place. But if your reading is all around certain basic themes, it all kind of comes together. So that's what I often recommend people do. Get a whole bunch of books and surround yourself with them.
Then, okay, so in the spirit of giving advice, who else should we have on the podcast?
Oh, wow. Well, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that question. I think my former colleague, Rodney Hauser,
Okay.
who Howsare, he's great. And he's at DeSales University, Rodney.Hauser at desales.edu. And he's also a Balthasar scholar. But Rodney is also far, far better at political theory and political philosophy than I am.
Huh.
In fact, his master's degree was in political philosophy. And he knows a lot about Leo Strauss and guys like that. So he knows a lot more about like the new polity guys, post-liberalism, liberalism. He would be a very interesting guy. Another guy I'd recommend is a Canadian theologian, David Deane, Deane. He teaches at the Atlantic School of Theology in Canada. He's actually Irish, but he teaches in Canada. And he's written a wonderful book called The Banality of Evil.
Wow.
No, that's not what it is. What is it? Hang
It's a
on.
pretty famous title. You may not.
Oh, well, yeah. It's The Banality. Gosh, I just had it out the other day too. But it's a great book. It's The Banality of something.
Okay.
The banal.
Oh, the tyranny of the banal. That's right. That's what it is. The tyranny of the banal.
The renew.
Or the banal. Or here's another pronunciation. Is it the banal or the banal? There you
Nale. Yeah. In the original.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's it. The tyranny of the banal. I can never get that tyranny of the banality of evil thing out of my brain when I try to remember his book. Yeah, The Tyranny of the Banal. It's a great, great book, and he is a great guest. I've had him on my podcast 4 or 5 times. He's wonderful.
Wonderful.
All right, guys, I gotta go.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time.
The Benedictine Thought and Action podcast is produced by John Badley and Jason Herron. But secretly, it is our unpaid college intern, Lumen Glowfish, who keeps asking if our podcast has visual character. Audio splicing is handled by John's Golden Doodle, Llewellyn Badley. Simply chews through the XLR cables whenever we go off on too long of a tangent. We rely on Jason's cat, Gigi, for quality control. She navigates cerebellar hypoplasia, grace, and our theological errors with very sharp claws. The show is engineered by a cloistered 14th century anchorite, which explains the hollow echo and the faint sound of weeping in the background. Our music was composed by Thomas Aquinas, but since he left it unfinished, you just hit the demo button on a Yamaha synthesizer and hope for the best.